So today's interview is going to make, heck, it already has made a lot of folks in INFORMS' hometown of Baltimore jealous, because I will be speaking to none other than the Baltimore Orioles assistant GM and head of analytics, Sig Mejdal. With Baltimore's 2023 season opener literally on top of us, I'm thrilled to sit down with Sig and talk about analytics at the Orioles, as well as his own professional journey to an outstanding career in sports analytics. Sig, thank you so much for taking time out of what I'm sure is an incredibly busy spring training schedule to talk with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ashley.
So I have to say, in researching this episode, you've had a pretty fascinating career so far, working as a biomathematician at NASA on a project related to sleep and performance. And I heard a rumor you were even a blackjack dealer at one point.
Yeah, that was my summer job in college. It was good fun. I miss it.
It sounds fun. I'd love to hear how you decided to make this big mid-career transition and what that experience was like.
Yeah, it was the book Moneyball. When Moneyball came out in 2003, that changed everything for me. I had been interested in baseball statistics and the numbers and the analysis since I was a kid, but who cares? Nobody cared. There wasn't this sabermetric movement like there is now. And I forever just thought of myself as being, an outsider interested in baseball, following the research. And then when that book came out, of course, that changed my imagination. And I knew I would kick myself if I didn't give it a try. And so I naively thought that I would just have to let the teams know I'm available and, willing to relocate, and I'd have a job at the end of the week. But it was a long, arduous venture from there. In hindsight, perhaps I was selling something to persons whose job security depended on not buying it, and so that's a tough sell, of course. And then after a year and a half of these attempts, it lined up very fortunately for me with the St. Louis Cardinals, and so I found out where Missouri was, and I moved there.
So when you made the transition to working in baseball analytics, it was still pretty new. Did you ever have trouble convincing those you worked with of the validity of the data-based insights you were providing?
The short answer is God, yes. So these were, first of all, they were human beings, and change is often difficult for our species. We'll say we want change, but what we so often mean is we want others to change. Me, I'm okay. So it was difficult, and it was extra difficult that they were experts. It was extra difficult in that the change I was selling was counterintuitive. Additionally, I was not of their fraternity. They haven't worked with, persons like myself. Most of their work life was with baseball insiders, ex-baseball players that really made up the majority of the front offices. And, Moneyball, for all its wonders, it didn't really create a welcoming environment for outsiders into baseball. That the portrayal of the scouts was a bit, one-dimensional, and that's not really what they are. And so it was in that environment that I was trying to get in and implement change. And yes, it was very, very difficult.
So I'd love to hear what it was like coming in on the ground floor of an analytical field that really has grown to have such a wide range of application, as well as an increasing degree of public notoriety with, as you mentioned, books and movies, et cetera.
Yeah, I was aware, like when I got the job, I believe I was the fourth analyst in baseball. So I was aware that there was very few of us, but I never really thought that this was sort of this beginning of a rapid change that was going to really revolutionize the industry. I was just at the Cardinals, happy to have a job in baseball, working away, trying to get some of the work I've done implemented. So I never really had the big picture, but now that you ask it, and now that I've had time to look back, it was a really unique experience that not only was I one of the few people in baseball, but both in St. Louis and Houston and now in Baltimore, I've worked for owners that aren't just saying, maybe stick your big toe in this analytics thing, dabble, but instead we're quite clear with the marching orders that find out whatever inefficiencies, analytics could reveal, and then take advantage of it, put it to use, and that the owner would be supportive of it. So it was quite a bit of leading edge and bleeding edge, and I think was a really unique, good fortune experiences that I have when I look back on it now.
So, and over time, what do you think some of the biggest impacts of analytics have been on both how the sport is played as well as the behind the scenes applications like scouting and even back office functionality?
Yeah, it depends on the org, but it could permeate the decisions. I think anytime that a human being is making a decision and there's a database of past decisions and results, there's analytics that could help anchor, give a base rate, just help educate the decision. And so, in-game strategy and the manager's decisions are no exception to that. And you've probably seen the infield positioning, for instance, that's getting banned now this year, but for the last 10 years, the infield positioning and outfield too is done not solely by the gut, the intuition of the manager or one of the coaches, but instead looking at the past batted ball distributions of the batter, the pitcher, and the skill of the defender. So that's become quite evidence-based. The efficacy of an intentional walk or a sacrifice bunt has been re-examined, and you see remnants of those changes year to year. And you brought up the front office. So yeah, you could think of the front office as just a series of decisions, one after another, with a wealth of disparate information coming in. And our goal is often to make sense of this information that I guarantee you will be contradictory in many of the attributes. And that's a multi-attribute decision-making task, and analytics do that much better than the human mind. So like I said, it really depends on the organization, but it could permeate everything.
So fast forward to 2018, when you first came to the Orioles, you were really the start of its analytics effort. What was the first thing you tackled in this new role?
Yeah, well, when we came here a few years ago, there was one developer, a very skilled developer here, but they had no analysts. And this was at a time when baseball had more than 400. So for whatever reason, they were avoiding this change. And our current GM, Mike Elias, and I came over from the Astros at the same time. And so much of our success, our experience, came from making sense of all the information available. And you simply can't do that without college level analytical skills in the front office. And so they had none. And so whatever we were going to do, whatever best practices we were going to implement, we can't do it without analysts. So the first thing we did was post job openings for both analytics and developers.
So now today, in what area or areas do you think analytics is being leveraged best within the Orioles?
It's a good question. I think our goal is like I said, is to assist the human decision maker as best we can, whatever the decision is, whether it's the manager and his decision whether to sacrifice bunt, to start this second baseman, whether it's international signing, whether it's the domestic American draft, whether to promote one of these three guys, all those decisions are being assisted now with analytics and tools created by our team.
So Sig, I'm rather infamous among my colleagues, and I've been mentioned to you earlier for not being perhaps the most sports-centric person. I may or may not have picked out an image of a soccer field to be used in a project about football analytics, which I'll never live down. So while I could pretend that the next several questions are ones I came up with on my own, no one would believe it. I enlisted the most diehard Orioles fans I know for these next questions and found out that number one, baseball fans don't hold back. And number two, analytics seems to be something that fans are really interested in. So I'd like to start out with, how does baseball analytics differ from other fields of analytics, and why is it so much more fun?
Yeah, to tackle the first part of the question, I don't think it differs at all. It's the same thing as other field. You're getting the data or you're acquiring technology to get you the data. And then it comes the effort of cleaning the data, finding errors, and then the more fun part of analyzing it. And then perhaps the most difficult part of all, if you do find an inefficiency, is being an agent of change and trying to get the organization, the decision makers, to take advantage of it. And I don't think that's different than any other field. It's fun for me because I love baseball, but I'm sure there's people who love real estate and they'd be just as excited working in real estate analytics, or there's parking lot analytics, anything. So for me, it's a wonderful match, but it's not too different than what's going on in so many other industries.
So this next question is regarding the impact of payroll versus the power of analytics. The division the Orioles are in also contains the three teams with the biggest payrolls: the Yankees, Red Sox, and Toronto Blue Jays. The argument can be made that they can essentially buy championships by stacking their teams with top players. However, the Tampa Bay Rays have a fraction of the payroll of other teams, but still rank high in the league. How do you use analytics as an advantage when your payroll is much smaller compared to teams you're competing with?
Yeah, it certainly is an advantage. That goes without saying. But the fact that Tampa Bay, they're a wonderful example of it. The fact that Tampa Bay has done so well in this division is a hint that there still are inefficiencies out there to capture. And that's been like part of my job since I started in baseball, is search for these inefficiencies. Now, like any industry, they're going to get more difficult to find. They're going to be smaller, and they're going to remain for a shorter amount of time. But it's still our job to find those inefficiencies, and there's something fun about going up against the big boys and being a little bit of an underdog.
So how do you use analytics in scouting to find diamonds in the rough to groom into excellent players?
Yeah, so perhaps one example of that would be with the draft. That's every year in June or July, the teams take turns picking American high school or college players. And many of the college players have been playing for 2 or 3 seasons, 1 or 2 summers. So there's a lot of data. We have a large team of scouts, and then we'll have all sorts of other information, biological information, and one could describe the draft as an exercise in combining information. And as I hinted at before, all these attributes of a particular player, they're not going to point in the same direction. And where it gets interesting is where one methodology is giving a thumbs up and another is giving a thumbs down, and what you do when you're faced with that. And I know of no better way of settling that than by looking at data, looking at historical data, and try to make sense of it.
So now, do you think sabermetrics is overrated? After all, Billy Beane has never won a World Series.
Yeah. How do I answer that? I'd probably ask, do you think boxing with both of your hands compared to one hand tied behind your back is an overrated strategy? Your answer would be no, of course not. It's just a best practice. So if we have to compete with, as you described, some of these teams with higher payrolls, why in the world would I not try to use all the information available? And why in the world would I not hire persons who have skills in making sense of all that information? So no, by no means do I think it's overrated.
In your opinion, what is the most important stat when looking at who to hire?
Yeah, well, we have a nice advantage, or in that so many people are fascinated with baseball, and there's so many people that are passionate and motivated that when we have a job opening, we'll get 500 or 600 or more resumes. And so I think the most important attribute beyond having a technological expertise, like we could find that's relatively easy. So many of the young men and women from the colleges now are technologically very capable. I look for not only an analyst, but in any position, I think a modesty, a humility, And that often is inversely correlated with expertise. It's hard to find an expert who's truly modest, but it's that modesty, it's that humility that I think drives them to be searching for ways of improving, searching for a better way of doing things, looking at other fields to generate ideas, looking at people outside of their fraternity for ideas. And that's the type of person that I love working with. The opposite of that, I'm the one that knows it all and has no interest in rethinking things. I'm not much help for that person.
So are you analyzing things like how many people will order a hot dog if the game is a no-hitter or when they're in extra innings?
Sort of. I mean, to put a price tag or a recommended salary on a player, we need to not only estimate what we him to do on the field, but how that success or failure on the field leads to attendance, parking, revenue, admissions, and number of hot dogs purchased. So it's not directly like that, but we definitely do look at revenue generated from an extra win, an extra homer, an extra run, whatever.
How are analytics used to put fans in seats?
Yeah, well, I'm on the baseball side, not the business side, and I'm sure there's a lot of insights into what brings a fan into the game. But my guess is the main effect is the team winning or not, and that's our main concern on the baseball side, is to create a winning team that we could sustain as quickly and for as long as possible. Now, I know we have ticketing analytics, marketing analytics, the in-game experience analytics, and they're much more in the weeds with the questions they have. But being on the baseball side, the best way I know of bringing fans into the seat is creating an entertaining, winning product.
All right, last submitted question. How have analytics affected the shift in the Orioles recruitment of international players?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift regarding international has not been analytics. That prior to Mike Elias and myself coming here at the end of 2018, that the Orioles were just not paying international players like other teams were. They were not participating in this. And when you have about 30% of major league value coming from the international market, it's just not a good idea to not be participating in that. So one of the first things John Angelos, our owner, and Mike Elias did was to change that and create an international program. So we have a new facility that's opening up, and we are participating in the acquisition of international talent as much as any other team. And that's been the big mover in this all. Now, the further away the player is from the major leagues, I think the less voice analytics has relative to our experts. So the loudest voice and the biggest say in the process on international signings are still our scouts with boots on the ground, seeing the players in Dominican Republic, Colombia, Venezuela, wherever. And that we have a full scouting department now, which we simply didn't before we got here.
So, Sig, this has been such an incredible interview. Thank you so much for taking time out of what right now must be a very busy schedule to speak with me. I probably will never be a sports expert, but I definitely learned a lot today. I'd like to give a special thank you to Bill Griffin, Kara Tucker, Kelly, biggest Orioles fan, Bacala, Jed Narsevich, and Peter McAvoy for sharing their knowledge and love of Orioles baseball. I have one last question for you before we go. If you weren't working in sports analytics or with NASA or as a blackjack dealer, what do you think you'd be doing?
Oh man, that would suck. I have in Baltimore, I have a friend who's a professional poker player. And so he shares with me a lot of the analysis and the tools and the training that he goes through. And to me, it's just this fascinating world. So if in your hypothetical, I'm able to make a living, because it's very difficult to do that. I think as a professional poker player, that would be cool, and I'd still get my analytics hit from that.
That's terrific. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Happy to be here, Ashley.